Watch the Venus mission timeline fill in. One marker appears, then another, then another. Through the Cold War, launches keep coming. Soviet missions, American missions. Every few years, another spacecraft is aimed at the same distant world. The pattern becomes so consistent that it starts to feel permanent. For more than 20 years, spacecraft keep heading toward the same planet. Not Mars, Venus. And that creates an expectation. More missions, more data, more follow-ups. A permanent exploration pathway appears to be forming. Then the pattern breaks. The launches stop appearing. The crowded timeline suddenly opens into a long, empty gap. A planet that once attracted repeated missions loses momentum with surprising speed. An entire direction of exploration seems to fade away, leaving behind a question that shaped the solar system later generations inherited. What happened to Venus? The longer the Venus mission timeline runs, the harder it becomes to believe the planet was simply out of reach. A probe descends through the clouds. Data comes back. Another mission follows. More data. Then surface images arrive from the planet itself. The pattern repeats again and again. Not a single lucky breakthrough, but a growing operational system. Spacecraft enter the atmosphere. Scientific instruments perform chemistry experiments. New measurements are returned. Mapping efforts continue. Mission markers keep accumulating across the Venus mission timeline. What stands out is not any one achievement. It is what those achievements should have led to. Every successful mission should have made the next mission easier to justify. Every success should have strengthened the future. Instead, the future timeline will show the opposite. And that changes the mystery completely. If Venus missions had failed repeatedly, the later silence would make sense. A destination that cannot be reached eventually falls off the agenda. But that explanation begins to collapse as more results arrive. The evidence points in the opposite direction. Venus exploration achieved repeated operational success. The Soviet Union effectively built a functioning Venus exploration program. The planet was being visited, studied, photographed, and measured, which creates a problem. Because every new success removes another excuse for why Venus would later disappear, which creates a much more uncomfortable mystery. The missions proved Venus was reachable. So when the launches eventually faded away, technical access was no longer the explanation. Something else had to be removing the planet from the agenda. By the early 1980s, the Venus mission timeline no longer looks experimental. Clusters of successful missions sit beside one another. Surface imagery expands. Maps add detail. New results build on older results instead of starting from scratch. Each mission leaves behind a larger foundation for the next one. The important change is not what any single spacecraft accomplished. It is that the system appears to be stabilizing. The timeline grows denser. Mission capability improves. Venus begins to look less like a difficult target and more like infrastructure. The hardest problems appear solved. A long-term planetary program seems to be taking shape in front of you. That perception matters because it changes what comes next. When an exploration effort reaches this stage, the normal expectation is growth. More missions, more instruments, more detailed studies. The path forward appears clearer than it did years earlier. By now, Repeated successes have produced increasingly detailed knowledge of the planet. The effort looks sustainable. Operationally, it feels established. If you had looked at the trend in the early 1980s, you probably would have predicted more Venus exploration, not less. For a moment, the simplest conclusion seems completely reasonable. Humanity solved Venus. For a moment, the simplest conclusion seems completely reasonable. Humanity solved Venus. Not in the sense that every question had been answered, but in the sense that reaching, studying, and returning information from the planet had become a proven capability. Looking at the Venus mission timeline at its peak, acceleration feels inevitable. Then the prediction fails. Not after a major disaster. Not after a catastrophic accident. The missions simply stop growing. The frontier that looked ready to expand never becomes what the trend suggested it would become. Gaps appear where new markers should have been. The system that seemed to be growing stronger suddenly stops behaving like a permanent frontier. If success guaranteed a future, this is not what the timeline should look like. At first, the change is easy to miss. The knowledge keeps accumulating. The earlier achievements remain real, but the flow of new missions no longer matches the momentum that came before. Before looking at Mars, notice what has already happened. Venus was losing momentum first. The decline begins before a replacement fully emerges. Only then does another trend become impossible to ignore. As Venus markers become less common, Mars missions begin multiplying elsewhere. One timeline is thinning. Another is growing denser. At the same time, Venus is producing fewer truly novel returns than it once did. The destination that had generated repeated breakthroughs is no longer creating the same sense of discovery. Then, the largest supporter of Venus exploration disappears. Not a spacecraft. Not a mission. An entire country. The Soviet Union had carried much of the Venus effort. When it collapsed, the institutions, funding structures, engineering teams, and long-term plans behind that effort collapsed with it. The effect becomes visible on the timeline itself. Mission markers disappear. Resources move. Institutional support moves. Scientific attention moves. And suddenly, a fact that once seemed impossible becomes unavoidable. Venus lost momentum after technical success had already been achieved. The belief that solving a destination guarantees its future cannot survive what the timeline shows. A world can be reachable, studied, and operationally proven, yet still fade from the center of exploration. What determines the future is not technical capability alone. Momentum has to survive as well. And once that momentum leaves, entire scientific pathways can begin disappearing with it. The final answer is sitting on the Venus mission timeline. Years pass. Then more years. Large stretches of empty space begin separating the missions. The pathway built during the Cold War does not expand into a permanent stream of exploration. It thins out until an entire generation grows up with very little new activity aimed at Venus. Meanwhile, other destinations remain active. New missions continue launching. New data continues arriving. New momentum keeps building. On the Venus timeline, the opposite is happening. The gaps become the story. For decades, one of the closest planets to Earth receives little sustained exploration, despite the fact that the ability to reach it already exists. The result is visible. Knowledge accumulation slows. Opportunities vanish before they are attempted. A world that once sat near the center of planetary exploration drifts to the edge of attention. That is the real consequence of what happened. Which means those old Venus images look different now. For years, they seemed like evidence of victory. Proof that humanity had opened another world. But on this timeline, they become something else. They are reminders of the last period, when Venus sat near the center of planetary exploration. Venus was not lost because it was unreachable. The exploration pathway already existed. Venus was lost because the institutions, resources, and priorities that sustained that pathway moved elsewhere. Scientific priorities decide which worlds humanity truly knows. Distance matters. Technology matters. But neither is enough on its own. Exploration follows perceived value and momentum. The planet stayed. The program didn't.